Good evening, Dr. Zivak. Thank you very much for your time. We do appreciate it. Are the economic woes facing sub-Saharan Africa that much worse than those facing the rest of the world due to COVID-19?
Well, what is clear is we are living unprecedented times across the world and also in Africa. We're projecting that economic growth would decline from 2.4% in 2019 to minus 2% in the best case scenario, and it could be all the way to minus 5% in the worst case scenario. This will plunge sub-Saharan Africa in its first recession in 25 years. Well, is this worse than other parts of the world? This is a global crisis. It's affecting all countries, and what we have seen is a clear collapse in manufacturing orders across the world. But we are also seeing early signs that this crisis may be worse in Africa, and for a number of reasons. The first is that this is not just a health crisis in Africa. It's going to be combined with an economic crisis and a potential food crisis, because our report is showing that we could have a decline in agricultural output, which, combined with a decline in imports of food, could put the poor at risk of food shortages. So that's important, and it's one element of difference. And the second element of difference is that containment measures that are being applied for economies for which 90% of the people are in the informal sector are likely to have more negative consequence moving forward, and the impact on household welfare could be even more damaging.
Yes, of course, the informal sector is such a crucial issue. Here in South Africa, we are 2/3 of the way through our lockdown, and we've had to revise our regulations to allow informal traders back on the streets to actually sell, because they simply are living hand to mouth. They cannot survive if they do not sell or trade in food. It is very concerning. South Africa, of course, was already in a recession before COVID-19 hit. What are your predictions? What is the World Bank's prediction around South Africa?
First of all, the point you made on containment policy is crucial. I think it highlights the need for African countries to probably have a differentiated policy response, because we may not be able to keep containment as long as other parts of the world would be able to, without actually providing some social protection or some direct assistance to the population, and that would require fiscal space that most countries, including South Africa, do not have. And that fiscal space has been eroded by a decline in commodity prices. Oil has declined, platinum and many other minerals have declined, then depriving countries like South Africa with the fiscal space to face this crisis. But even before the crisis, South Africa was already going through a recession. And that makes it even more difficult. And it is important to look at those economies, South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola, which together represent more than 60% of Africa's GDP, as being, hit by a double whammy. It's actually a triple whammy. You have the health crisis, the economic crisis, especially coming from commodities, and then the economic disruptions that will come from, containment measures. So together, these three economies may actually experience a deep recession, and growth rate for these three economies together could be as low as minus 7%.
That is incomprehensible. And, Nigeria and South Africa are the two strong economies, and they sort of vie for first place. We've spoken now about South Africa. Where is Nigeria in all of this? And bearing in mind that at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, we have around 10,000 confirmed cases throughout Africa of the virus. So suggestions are that it may still be coming our way.
Absolutely. From all the epidemiologic projections, we're not yet at the tip of the iceberg in Africa. We're not there yet. We've crossed the 10,000 cases, this morning, and the situation is likely to get worse before it gets better. Our largest economies clearly have a huge responsibility here. South Africa was already in recession, but Nigeria was also experiencing a very sluggish recovery before COVID hit, and they will be hit even harder by the collapse in oil prices. Oil has lost almost 60% between December and end of March, and it's clearly a terrible situation. It's akin individuals getting a 60% salary cut while still having to face your bills at the end of the month.
Now,
This is the situation.
It is very distressing, but some potential ray of hope is that the World Bank and the IMF are now calling for, I suppose we could call it a bit of a debt holiday for sub-Saharan countries. Could you explain how will this work? Which countries will benefit, and who actually gets to make that call on whether that debt holiday for sub-Saharan countries will actually become a reality?
Well, what is really important here is to realize that our countries in sub-Saharan Africa would not have the fiscal space to fight this pandemic. We will need support. This is a global crisis and it needs a global solution. And when you look at fiscal space across countries in Africa, debt service and salaries often take more than half of government's revenues. So it is important as part of this global solution that creditors allow for a debt standstill for sub-Saharan Africa to face this terrible exogenous shock. The World Bank and IMF are really advocating for this solution. African countries are all getting behind it for sure, and it would be important for all creditors, bilateral, official, and hopefully at some point private creditors as well to join in.
Well, thank you so much. That was Dr. Albert Zufak, the World Bank's chief economist for Africa, speaking to us from Washington.